So we are at the end of the first day of the Coller Institute Private Equity Symposium, and I thought it was a very interesting day. They raised a lot of questions, there was a lot of interest. The day started with a keynote speech by Alexander Ljungqvist, and he had some very interesting facts. He's using a new data set about private firms, and he was comparing the behavior of private firms versus public firms. And what he highlighted was how private firms are actually investing much more than public firms, and also their investment behavior is more sensitive to the creation of investment opportunity. And that is really interesting and striking because in a way we always see public markets as a source for raising funds when we want to invest. And therefore that's one of the advantages for going public. That's how we often teach it. You can raise funds for if a good investment opportunity comes about. But what he finds is actually private companies are better at doing that. And that raises, therefore, the issue of, well, then what is the important role of going public? And in a way, what he documents is IPOs and the number of listed companies as a proportion of companies in a country, particularly also for the US, has gone down. And then he speculates what are the reasons. And of course, this is all very relevant for private equity because private equity takes company private. And they're saying, we can turn around our companies, we can make them better. He's making a point not specific to private equity, but that should resonate very well with private equity because they're saying, they take the companies private, and that is when the company can invest better, can be reacting better to investment opportunities. And one of the reasons he suggests is why private companies are better is they're not subject to short-termism. You are less worried about communicating with a large number of shareholders.
I was very stricken by the fact that the sheer degree, I think it was about 90% of the companies are private companies, whether this is private equity or not. This was very impressive. And you are absolutely right. I mean, the fact that they are much more don't comply by the rules of fixed dividends, but allow dividends to vary and to be basically residual elements where the investment opportunities come first, and that shows very strikingly the limitation of the public market. The panel where I would like to describe is the one that was on the role that private equity is playing now within the banking industry and the overall. And basically what I heard from the panel there was a lot of actually complain why private equity is not doing enough of their share. There are huge opportunities which are not fully utilized by the fact that we are in a European crisis. We have a currency crisis, we have the euro crisis. The banks are under stiff regulation. The banks don't do enough in terms of providing loans to corporations as they used to. They limit themselves to the upper quartile, perhaps, which means that there's a huge empty slack that is available now, and they would like to see private equity taking more advantage of this than they do. For better or worse, the FSA is putting more regulation on private equity, so that's not going to be an easy landing, an easy cruise, but nevertheless, private equity, perhaps with the help of pensions directly and sovereign wealth funds, can do the job. And in fact, the whole Europe is now looking at private equity for the purpose of rescuing and filling the gap that the banks are now basically left behind. So that was a very interesting observation regarding an opportunity that exists, plus also the fact that there is a need, a major need, that private equity can help Europe in the current situation.
No, I agree. I thought that panel was very interesting because it had some deep thought, just going beyond the surface. And also it was interesting to have the perspective, for example, of a CEO of one of these companies and saying what is adding the value of the business and saying, we wouldn't have existed if we didn't have private equity to a backer. So sometimes creating value is just private equity having more appetite for risk and entering in the like financial service industries just after the Lehman Brothers collapse. That shows us something positive about private equity. And I thought also, a new part which was interesting, in the next panel, which was on the team turnover, I was particularly interested because I've done research on that, and I thought it was a very interesting discussion we had two LPs and two GPs, and of course it was the different perception. People say LPs just don't want turnover, they want stability of the team, and the GPs really complain about that, but they try to comply with it. And what came out is the discussion that the reality is more complex than that, as often is. And the idea is LPs, yes, they are afraid of total chaos if a lot of people run. They want some stability in the sense that they want some people who guarantee continuity. You can't have a complete generational change and have people completely new who come across. So because of course you need someone who comes from the past and brings experience. But given that you have some continuity, they're actually happy in having some turnover, and their point was otherwise people will leave. The best young people will leave because there's no space on the top, and they will feel like, well, what's the space for us? And it's like very often how to keep people motivated, how to give them incentives, and how to give the right importance to the performance of the individuals. I thought, however, it was interesting that the GPs still kept mentioning, but when we talk to our LPs, they still will look at the number of turnover and so on, while the two LPs that we had in the panel saying, well, we don't do that. It is probably true that we had two very seniors, very held in high esteem LPs, and they're probably more sophisticated than the average LPs around. And when these companies are raising, billions, they go to LPs like the ones we had, which run, global fund, very sophisticated, but they have to go also to less sophisticated LPs. So I am sure that the discussion would be even more controversial with the less sophisticated LPs. But at the same time, of course, we want to learn from the sophisticated LPs what we should do. So I thought it was very interesting, yes.
The last panel was on exit, and we were very blessed to have four very distinguished speakers there. Two are bankers that are engaged in M&A transactions, and two were coming from the private equity GP side. And it was a lively discussion regarding what is the current environment today about exits, and is IPO a true exit or not? Is it true an exit to management? Do management want to have their independent continued as an IPO, or they want to be bought out and find themselves out of job and maybe meet the financial compensation there? Is that a true exit to private equity? I think the main matter that I learned is the importance, although it's very difficult, to maintain multiple tracks and to run parallel IPO as well as strategic trade sale optionalities, and sometimes even third option, which is a secondary buyout. And I think it's more true today than ever have been because of the high variability of the market. And you are not sure whether IPO window will be open. In fact, somebody said there that if you start preparing yourself to an IPO, for sure by the time you are ready, the IPO window will be closed. So you have to be prepared all the time. And clearly asking management to do it parallel to running a proper business is very, very demanding and perhaps only possible for a quite large organization. So I think it was very interesting to see that essentially what we require from the management is to do two things. First of all is to run the business as usual, simply because the exit may not happen. And second is to prepare themselves for exit, because exit is the bread and butter and the whole lifeline of private equity. That's the whole model. And it's really a dual track that has to be run all the time. And it's pretty difficult to do so. We also discussed the seasonality effects that are regarding IPOs or not, and also, for example, exotic options to exit, perhaps through, I don't know, Asian, Hong Kong type of IPO. Is that making sense or not? To whom it doesn't make sense? And I think what I learned is that by the end of the day, you have to stick to what you're good at. If it makes sense to serve the, say, Asian clientele and to exit there, you should do it. If it's only because currently the multiple there is higher, in the long run, that's not the right way to go. So it was very fun panel with quite knowledge on the space. Oh, and I would like to mention just one more thing, is this is the notion of too big to exit. We have seen deals in 2006 and 2007. Alliance Boots is one of them. AA is another one, by which these are very large company, and they do require today that we have the IPO window open because they can only exit through an IPO. They should be able to serve their debt, and they should hope and plan for a good economy to have. And all of this has to be planned and happen within a period of time. And it may not happen. So that's this worry about these major transactions, whether they will reach an IPO, because the IPO is their only option out. So that's was also a reflection over there.
And also our other two keynote speakers really were very interesting. I mean, Linda Gratton, continuing the tradition of our symposium, every time now we have one of the keynote speakers who is not someone about private equity, but is someone who is very influential about the way you run your business, and therefore is there to say things about how you should run your business. And she's an expert on HR, people in organization, and she talked about future of work. And I thought the message she had about focusing on technology, demographics, low carb, a lot of things like this, globalization. It was very interesting because she threw here and there some interesting facts that should make private equity people think. She was thinking about, if you think about it, she's saying, look also for looking for the talent pool. She's saying, now people from Africa can collect online and have the same knowledge than people in developed countries. So all of a sudden, the talent pool is enlarging. Then she would say, we look at China. China is important. The 16% of the income of people is going into education of their single child. So that will tell us something about the growth of the talent pool in China. But on the other hand, she was saying in India, we have these talent factories like Tata or Unilever India, which have produced some of the top managers in India and great talents. And China doesn't have that. So what does it mean? Where do we go for the talent pool? And also, how do we think about our future customers? I think she had some very interesting insight that people can take away and think when they're thinking about which business to acquire, which industry to bet on, where to go to look for the talent. It was very insightful. And Ed Truell, I thought it was a very candid talk. It's nice to see sometimes some people in private equity who just say what they think, and had some very interesting insight. And it was very interesting because he came immediately after Alexander Ljungqvist, and he also touched on the tensions between private markets and public markets. How do you make them coexist? And also he is saying sometimes private equity has not been in recent times smart enough to enter in the arena when assets were underpriced. There were good opportunities. They didn't enter in them enough.
But of course, we have to take it with a few grains of salt, because in retrospect, we all come and complain, how come they did not buy the assets in 2009 where they were so cheap? And I remember 2009 was very, very, very risky, volatile times, and nobody knew where the world will go. So in hindsight, we all have the 2020 and...
I agree, but then, as academics, we usually take the past data to project and look better in the future, so probably
we'll
that's
have more
what
data
we
points.
should do, exactly, more data set and more learning. I found it really a very good day of inspiring ideas for future research, for engaging practitioners. I thought there was a lot of material there for a lot of stuff I thought.
And I'm happy that the academics were there as well to take this and to learn from the real world into their studies.